All right, everybody.
He's everybody's favorite ancient alien.
Yes, I got my award yesterday, and yes, I am on the Ancient Alien show, and I've known Giorgio, by the way, for many years, and people will see me now at airports occasionally, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, aren't you one of those guys on Ancient Aliens? And I'll say, yeah, and they'll say, what's with that guy's hair? Yeah, what is with it? What is with that guy's hair? Giorgio's a super guy. I love him a lot. We're really good friends. And Eric Von Doniken, too. He's fun. All the guys in Ancient Aliens are very good. Tell you just a few things about myself real quick. I was born in France, actually. My parents are Americans. I spent my early years in France, and then my father was from Colorado, so moved back to Colorado. Grew up in Denver and Durango. Later, my parents got divorced. My brother and my mother and I moved up to Missoula, Montana. I graduated from high school in Missoula and started going to the University of Montana. This was 1976. And I was taking archaeology and history and philosophy and comparative religious studies and creative writing and stuff like that. And I also was taking Mandarin, Chinese, and our professor was a Catholic priest from China, Father Wang, and he was a cool guy. And one day he came to our class and he read a letter from one of his students who was teaching English in Taiwan, and it basically in the letter said, "Hey, Father Wang, I'm living in Taiwan now. I'm teaching English. If any of your students want to come to Taiwan and teach English, I can help them get a job. They don't have to have a degree in teaching. They don't even have to speak Chinese fluently. And, I can help them get a job." And I went up to Father Wang right then after class, and I said, "Father Wang, that's what I want to do. I want to go to Taiwan and teach English and stuff." And that's what I did. And so this is 1976. I went to Taiwan, started teaching English there, but I very quickly, I wanted to go to the Himalayas and go to Tibet and Kathmandu and Mount Everest, and I had a dual interest. I was a technical climber at that time, and I wanted to go to Tibet and India and all that, travel around the world, and my parents had traveled a lot, and we'd been to Mexico City and climbed the pyramids and Stonehenge and to Greece and Turkey and stuff. So that got me going on a trip for 5.5 years around the world, traveling through India and Pakistan. I went to the Himalayas, Mount Everest and stuff. I didn't climb Mount Everest, but I did climb another peak nearby, technical climbing. Went through Afghanistan at that time. This is like 1977 now, and through Iran, before the revolution in Iran. Through Turkey, through Syria, Jordan, to Israel. I lived there for a while. Then I eventually went to Greece and to Egypt. I wanted to see the Great Pyramid and whatnot, and just traveling around the world and trying to make money and stuff. And I spent a couple of years in Africa, went back to India, and then went back to China. I became one of the first people to travel around China and backpack around. So I came back to the US, and I started writing my books on lost cities and things like that. Eventually I formed my own publishing company, which is right around the same time as first Apple computers came out, and laser printers and fax machines and all that. So I was one of the early desktop publishers. Then I started going to South America and Central America and traveling around the Pacific. And as you probably guess, I love to travel. I love ancient mysteries. I love Megaliths, Atlantis, Lemuria, UFOs, the moon, ESP, reincarnation, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, let's go. We're going to see a bunch of megaliths first, and then we'll go to these stone balls. Eventually we'll end up on the moon. So look, the largest megaliths in the world right now that we know about are the ones at Baalbek in Lebanon. And they are gigantically huge blocks of stone. Some of them weigh over 1,000 tons. In fact, it's only been recently that they discovered the largest known quarried block of stone in the world. It's at the quarry in Baalbek. It weighs 1,650 tons. That is super duper heavy. Anything that's weighing just even a couple of tons, like a 5-ton block of stone, is a megalith. Even a 1-ton block of stone is a megalith. Only the largest cranes in the world that are usually fixed at docks and things like that can lift a stone like this, 1,650 tons. Obelisks, by the way, which we'll get into later, a typical obelisk weighs around 500 tons, and they're big too. One of the things at Baalbek, and by the way, in my talk tomorrow, I'll get much more into this aspect, but I want to also point out this. This is actually, those giant ashlars at Baalbek, there is also this at the Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. And this is the Wailing Wall, the Praying Wall. You couldn't see these blocks of stone until recently because the Israelis made a tunnel along this wall. And so we're standing in a tunnel, but this giant block of stone here, we don't know how much it weighs. It's like the blocks at Baalbek. It's probably 500 to 600 tons. We don't know because we don't know how deep it goes. She's standing there. You can see how perfectly other blocks are beneath it, how perfectly fitted, but this is one gigantically huge block of stone. So what I'm saying here now is that what's in Jerusalem is the same thing at Baalbek, and that is a massive megalithic platform of huge blocks of stone, and then other things are built on top of it. And it must be prehistoric. This is not something probably from King Solomon's time. There's all kinds of obelisks and monoliths underneath the ocean. Recently, they found this fallen obelisk or huge standing stone off of Sicily underwater. There's 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean that are underwater, and there may be more. Here's an obelisk. This is called the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. Just to give you an idea again of giant monolithic stones. What happened with this obelisk, and we'll get more into obelisks later, was that as the Egyptians or whoever was quarrying this, and this probably would have weighed about 500 tons, as they got down underneath the stone, as they were beginning to cut underneath, they found that the obelisk itself had a natural crack in the stone, which they couldn't see before when they started the quarrying. Once they saw that crack, they stopped all the work on it because an obelisk has to be perfect, can't have any cracks in it. So they abandoned the quarrying of this. It was never lifted out. I've always been into Atlantis, the story, and the story of Atlantis is an Egyptian story. We get the story of Atlantis from the Greek philosopher Plato, who says it came from his uncle Solon, who was a diplomat in Egypt. Solon was told by these priests at the Temple of Sais in Egypt, they said, "You Greeks don't even know your own history. You're much older than you even think you are." And then he tells them the story of Atlantis and 10,000 years ago, battling Atlantis. Atlantis was to be somewhere in the Atlantic, perhaps the Azores, and it's underwater now, supposedly. And it was a concentric city with canals, and you kept going inside into the inner place. I've always been interested in other lost lands like Lemuria or this Kumari, Kandam, this is what they say in southern India, how there was this ancient continent, this is what the Tamils in southern India claim. So let's go briefly to Ollantaytambo, high in the mountains of Peru. These giant blocks, this is exactly what you see there today. It's how it was in Inca times. Giant blocks of red granite just on top of this hill. And what are there are these keystone cuts. And tomorrow I'll talk more about the keystone cuts in a little bit. That's more in my big workshop tomorrow. This is at Pumapunku in Bolivia, also high in the Andes Mountains. You've probably maybe seen this in an Ancient Alien show. And these are more of these keystone cuts. And these, to me, these are very important. They're an unusual way molten metals are poured into there. Talk about that later. Those same kind of keystone cuts, these T-shaped keystone cuts, are also found in Vietnam and in Cambodia at places like My Son. They're the exact same kind of keystone cuts that you find at Pumapunku and places like that. It's also at Pumapunku where you have these famous H blocks. And they are like these pre-cut Lego type blocks that fit together very perfectly. Let's watch that now. So it's like these H blocks are cut, each one is specially cut, and they're meant to fit together into a special wall as they come together, and it's almost like a prefab type megalithic building where they can put these things together and they just slide in, and suddenly you have a giant wall of these very carefully articulated blocks that are fitting together. And this was the giant wall that was at Pumapunku.
How do they do that?
Well, tomorrow, in my workshop tomorrow, I will try to talk about that, but we don't know. It has to be done with power tools. It can't be done any other way. And this, of course, is a huge schism with mainstream archaeologists and people like me. So in this presentation, too, one of my personal interests, which totally baffles me, is this thing about these stone balls. Stone balls are found all over the world, incredibly. They're very famous in Costa Rica, where you have very large, perfect granite balls. They are ancient and they are man-made. There's no question about it. We don't know what they're for, why they would make them. And they're perfectly round. And I'm told also by engineers that it's one of the hardest things to do is make a perfect round ball without computer technology. You can't just bash these things out with a stone hammer in your hand. And archaeologists are baffled what this is about, why they're doing this. Yeah, I mean, trying to booby trap temples in Ecuador or something, that's what George Lucas thought, I guess. And here's more of them. They're found in these jungle areas of southwest Costa Rica, this area down here, right near the Panama border. They're just found washed up into jungle areas, and then they would bring them to the capital at San Jose. There's even a little island here that has some stone walls. It's almost like some tidal wave hit that part of Costa Rica where somehow a bunch of stone balls were and it washed them up into these mountains. We just don't know. When you go to the museum in San Jose there in Costa Rica, they put a kind of a smaller ball that's still pretty big in a grave there. It's just a display in the museum, and they say, yeah, the stone balls were symbols of the chief's authority. He was the chief, and then they would bury a stone ball with him or something. This is what they came up with. Well, that hardly makes sense with these really, really big stone balls, like the size of a Volkswagen or something like that. So here we go. This is a good one to show you right here in Los Angeles because I was sent this. This was a booklet from 1918 about the Santa Monica trolley, this electric trolley that came from the pier and went out into the interior of Santa Monica. Well, what they had to do was, because these electric trolleys couldn't go up a steep grade, there were some hills in Santa Monica that they had to just, steam shovel and get out of the way so that the track didn't have to go over these hills. Well, get this. They found all these stone balls in there. So, yeah, Los Angeles, Santa Monica was also a site of these stone balls. They called them at the time dinosaur eggs. But we don't know. They were distributed. They were maybe in somebody's garden in Beverly Hills or something. They vanished. They're not in any museums or anything I know of.
Dave, that's a Sunset and Silver Lake Boulevard. I have that book.
Okay, you have the trolley book.
Yeah.
You have that.
Yeah, it's on the corner. It's on Silver Lake Boulevard and Sunset.
Where the trolley went through. Okay. It was somebody in Los Angeles who sent me this. And, he knew my interests and stuff. And I have a company called Adventures Unlimited. Yeah, so he sent me this. Of course, I was fascinated. Well, here we go. Franz Josef Land, which is up near Spitsbergen. It's actually in the Russian Arctic. It's got these stone balls too. And in fact, it's kind of what people do when they go and see these things. And they're like these granite balls. Now, scientists here, now they're saying these are natural. Okay. They're like, I mean, and the way they try to explain it is that there's some kind of volcanic bomb, that's spewed out of some volcano that doesn't even exist there. Oh, and then, as a volcanic mass goes through the air, it spins around, becomes a ball, and then somehow solidifies and comes down and becomes a ball. But they appear to be man-made here too. So here's some of the Franz Josef Land ones. Bosnia has also stone balls in this ravine. I went to that pyramid in Bosnia one time, and then they took us to another area many hours away to this stream where there were also these stone balls in the stream. Here are some of them. They were, about 3 times the size of a basketball or something like that. There's a place in Mexico called Piedras Bolas. It's in kind of western central Mexico. It also has these stone balls. They're said to be natural, and there's some kind of volcanic bombs, again, that are thrown out from a volcano. Some are like on these pillars. Perhaps they are natural. I just don't really know. Here's another place, Nazarovo in Siberia. And this is recent. The Russians were doing these excavations. They found these giant stone balls there. It's baffling. We don't know what they're doing, why there are these stone balls, the ones in Costa Rica, which we know are man-made. There's no question about that. We have the Moraki boulders in New Zealand. There are also these stone balls. They're said to be natural, although exactly what they're doing there and how they are, here's the photos of them. So they're very strange. Yeah, and this is in the southern island on the west coast, and it's a popular tourist spot on the beaches. There are these stone balls in Italy, in San Augusta, Italy. And in fact, there's a number of sites around Italy where these stone balls are located. There's sometimes they roll them up, by some castle wall or something, just for tourists to look at. This is actually in Dubrovnik, in Croatia. More stone balls. There's all these stone balls there. This is Dubrovnik. Lots of stone balls there. Some are smaller. Some of these smaller stone balls might have been used in catapults or something like that, perhaps. Again, we're baffled what all these stone balls are all about. Here's a place in China, Gongxi and Hunan, that's southern China. It's this little village. It's famous for its stone balls that you can find there. All so mysterious. What is with the stone balls? I honestly have to say, I haven't quite figured it out. It could have something to do with moving megaliths, again, sound and even stuff. This is Malta, stone balls in Malta. And Malta is one of the oldest megalithic sites, too, in the world. It has these stone balls. Perhaps they were used for somehow, marbles of the gods, for rolling giant slabs around. We just don't know. Now let's go to that most mysterious of islands, Easter Island. And when you go to the museum there's a stone ball. And then they tell you on Easter Island, the most important thing on that island is not the statues and things, it's this stone ball, which is on the northern side of the island. They say that this stone ball right here is the center of the world. It's the most important thing on the whole island. And most tourists never even see it. You go there, it's sort of in a remote, it's just out there by itself. There's no one to stop you from, going up there and do anything to it. You take pictures. But again, this stone ball, and it would be man-made. So something is going on here. At Easter Island, what you have is, Easter Island is a kind of a big triangular type island, and there's a quarry in the center of it. And as you head up to that quarry, you have the stone statues that are so famous. And they're basically buried up to their chests. They're huge, they're cut out of volcanic rock. And here's the island itself. So according to the Easter Islanders, here's the quarry here, Rano Raraku. There's actually 3 volcanoes on each corner of the island. What the Easter Islanders said they did was that they would quarry the statues and then they would move them to the edges of the island and they would face inland. And they put eyes in them with inlaid eyes, and the statues had power. They were alive. This occult power they called mana came out of the eyes of the island. This is their own explanation, by the way. And it was to keep the island from sinking. because they were part of some lost land called Hiva that had already sunken, they said, and the statues were to keep the rest of the island from sinking. There's a strange thing here, too, in that there's a magnetic anomaly right over here, and the magnetic anomaly right over here, and according to these Easter Islanders too, the statues walked themselves around the island, but they had to walk in a clockwise way around the island. They couldn't walk counterclockwise. So in other words, there are statues over here. Here's the quarry. They're saying, yeah, the statues couldn't walk right from the quarry right up here. They had to walk all the way around the island. That's what the Easter Islanders are saying. And in fact, now there's this magnetic anomaly here, and maps of Easter Island tell you, yeah, your compass isn't going to work correctly in that part of the island. When Jacques Cousteau was there in like the early 80s, they warned him. He had an ultralight on the Calypso, and his son Philippe was going to fly his ultralight and fly it around the island. And they warned him, oh, don't go over here by this volcano because of this magnetic anomaly, some kind of Bermuda Triangle thing. But he ignored them, flew over there, all the instruments in his ultralight went crazy, and he crashed and was almost killed. He had to be medevaced back to Santiago in Chile to save his life. So it's all the kind of dangers and stuff. So most of the statues are still at the quarry, lying there up to their chest in debris. You go up these stairs to go into a crater that's in there. There's more statues there. In this crater are Tortora reeds, the same reeds that are at Lake Titicaca to build the reed ships and things like that. Also there in the quarry, there are more statues sitting up here. There are 7 seats. It's almost like a natural amphitheater. Statues are looking down into the amphitheater. It's all very strange. Some of the statues are very, very, very big and would weigh many, many tons. They were to have these top knots on their head, which are separate. These kind of top knot, which is like long hair that's tied up on top of your head. That's a Shivite thing, which I talk about in my new book. And there was one unusual statue, this one, where the guy is kneeling down. And Thor Heyerdahl is the one who found this statue, and he's in what's called a Kuzuo position. Here's how deep the soil is around these statues. I mean, there's up to 30 feet of soil built up on them. Now, why that would be, scientists aren't explaining, because they're saying these statues aren't that old. They're maybe just 1,000 years old or something. That's all they're saying, rather than being many, many thousands of years. But you wonder how long it would take for these statues to have that much soil built up around them. You can, go ahead. That's fine. Yeah, you guys have any questions? Yeah, what's your question?
Like Kumapunku, where I've been to, I personally think most of the things there are underground still waiting if it's ever going to happen to be excavated.
Sure, yeah, there's a lot of stuff underground there, yeah.
There's some catastrophic event that messed everything up and put it all under the ground.
Yeah.
And that's what happened over here also that made them...
Right, yeah, some kind of cataclysm hit this island, wiped people out, although the people were still there, buried these statues, all the work completely stopped. Yeah, it's exactly something like that.
So it's probably still so much under the ground over there.
Well, yeah, right. Whether there was any giant structures like Pumapunku, I don't know, but there are some interesting structures at that's right, and so much of it is buried and destroyed in these cataclysms. Here you can see how they would put this inlaid in the eyes. This is in the museum there. So the statues, when they moved them around the island to have this power, they put these eyes in them, and allegedly this power came out of their eyes and was helping to save the island. This is a very unusual statue at the museum in Easter Island, and it's of a woman. You can see breasts there. But it's a very, very bizarre, with the elongated head here, the eyes, no ears. I mean, this is very strange. And so we don't know, what to think about this exactly. They also, in 1960, they excavated this weird head It's now in the museum, but they didn't even put it in the museum until a few years ago. And yeah, it looks like kind of an alien head or something like that. Here it is now. It's also a very unusual statue that's now in the museum. This is a wall on the east, southeast side of Easter Island, near the airport runway. And it's called Vinapu. And it is megalithic with perfectly cut blocks, heavy lichen patches, the little notching of the stones. This is exactly what you see in Peru. Yeah, you see this at Cuzco and Sacsayhuaman and places like that. Exactly this kind of construction. And it's funny, because all these archaeologists and people who work at Easter Island, they don't want any connection between Easter Island and Peru. And when they take you to this, they'll say, yeah, it looks like a wall in Peru, but it's not, you know. There's no connection here, but, you know. Yeah, and this is clearly a wall whoever's building the walls and stuff in Peru, they're building this too. And in fact, I mean, even the name of this is interesting, Vinapu, which is very similar to Vimana, which is the Sanskrit word for the airships and stuff like that. So I just wanted to again show you, and this is part of what my expertise, what I look for, just this very fine cutting. I mean, this is only done by power tools. Yeah, so wherever you see this, I mean, they have to have power tools. And I'm talking electricity, diamond drills, metals and diamond saws to do all this stuff. It's what it takes. Yeah, or high tech. There's another thing too. This is that one Kuzuo thing. There's a way too of it's a new technique of it's also a powered thing, but it's of a diamond slurry, like a sand, in a water jet, where you forcing it out and with water and slurry at a really high rate, and you have a wand like a power washer, but it's shooting out this slurry of sand and diamond particles, and it can cut rock like butter, like this, with perfect slices. But diamond saws and things like that will do that too. But it shows I have to have some serious, kind of power saws and things like that to do any of this. All right, so what I want to talk about now here is what's called Kuzuo, and that is this kneeling position. It's a very unusual thing. I'm always traveling around the world looking for similarities and unusual similarities between different cultures, and this is one of them, the Kuzuo posture. That is on your knees with your hands more on your knees and your head up, and or your head down sort of. And it's this is from China. This is one from India. It's kind of a posture of sublimation to a king or something. Like, you're getting up. You have to have an audience with a king. You got to get down on your knees. You put your head forward, and the king either hits you over the head or cuts your head off, or he gives you an award or something. You're not sure what you're going to get, when you get up there. So this is an Egyptian statue in the Kuzuo posture. This is a Shang Chinese, statue, also in Kuzuo posture. He's got the mohawk haircut. You see that with the Olmecs. This is at Tiwanaku. These guys wearing turbans. They're in the Kuzuo posture. They're down on their knees doing this. It's an unusual position to be in. This is an Olmec statue in Mexico. He's in the Kuzuo posture. He also has the top knot on his head, like the Easter Islanders. This is from Mohenjo-Daro in India and Pakistan. He's in the Kuzuo posture, this unusual posture. So that's something to see. Let's go back to Easter Island. We were talking about Indus Valley and Easter Island. On Easter Island, you have what's called Rongo writing, which is an undeciphered writing, but it's very similar to the writing of the Indus Valley in India. This is a Rongo tablet. The figures are all kind of people in different positions with their arms and their hands and things like that, and each one is some kind of a character. Kuzuo, or Rongo, is also written in the ox plows pattern. That is where you write one line left to right, the next line is right to left to right, right to left. That's an unusual style of writing. It's known as Bostaphedon writing. The Hittites wrote that way. Doric Greek was also written that way. This is a Hittite This is Hittite hieroglyphs here written in a post-Ophidian pattern. And the whole idea there, too, is how Easter Island's down here, that, yeah, they're traveling to the Pacific, they're coming to the Americas, they're returning through Easter Island, and it's all back into Southeast Asia and then ultimately to India and Egypt and stuff. One of the great eighth wonders of the world is the city of Nan Madol, and it's in Micronesia, right up here near Guam. We're going to look at it. This place is the eighth wonder of the world. Most people have never heard of it. It's on a remote island called Ponape, which is now the capital of the Federated States of Micronesia. It's a city called Nan Madol. It's built out of prismatic blocks of basalt. Archaeologists believe there's over 250 million tons of basalt that is stacked up in walls and canals on this island. Some of it's underwater. Entire mountains would be dismantled to get all the material for this city. It's built into the ocean. They don't know where they got the stones from this because so much material is in this city. It's incredible. I've been here like 5 times. You got to go to Hawaii or Guam, and then you can fly there. It's a little bit difficult to get to this island. Some of it's underwater. The largest blocks of stone here are 80 tons. The natives say that the stones, these are all underwater ones and stuff, they've made artificial islands. The natives say that the stones were flown through the air and levitated and flown through the air from the other side of the island. This is what they say. On the other side of the island there is a basalt plug like this. They call it Chicken Shit Mountain. And it has this columnar prismatic basalt. And it's possible that some of the material came from here, and it is on the other side of the island. But there's 250 million tons of this basalt there. It's just entire mountains would be dismantled. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about cone heads then. And you go to Peru, particularly this elongated skulls thing is also a mystery. And this is something around the world. You have all these unusual skulls. Some are widened. We have pumpkin head skulls. We've got elongated skulls. Here we are, this Chongo skull. I mean, some of these guys have craniums that are twice the size of ours and so extended. I mean, they are some weird-looking guys. And they're from the Chongos pyramid, which is in Paracas. This is all, here's an x-ray of one of them. This is all totally real. There's no question that these skulls existed. And they're all over South America. They're also in Central America. Now, there's a way of taking children, very small infants, when they're born, and you start binding their head. You can force this cranium into this elongation. And we know that people do that, and you'll see some slides. But the question is why? Why were they doing this? Now, this is a very unusual skull. Normally, when you're manipulating someone's skull like this, you have sutures and you have plates in your head, and they haven't totally bound yet when you're just a child. But as you become an adult, they will fuse. And you're going to have these sutures at the top of your head, but this skull doesn't have that. This is a very unusual skull. We can't figure this one out. He does not have the sutures where the plates are coming together. You see here, we'll go back, you have here, but he should have binding things here with his skull, and he doesn't have it. This is a very, very strange skull. We can't figure this one out. This may be extraterrestrial. So we're, the idea. So some of this is absolutely people manipulating children, but the question is, are some people, or extraterrestrials, whatever, are they actually naturally like this with these elongated skulls? And that's a big question, and apparently there were. Now, this was something that wasn't going on just in South America, but it was happening in Egypt. This is Mera Totten, a statue of her, a bust of her, and this is her head. She, too, was a cone head with elongated cranium. Akhenaten and Nefertiti would have been like that. Nefertiti was not an Egyptian, by the way. We have here, this is an Anunnaki-type head. This is what they call Ubaid sculpture from Iraq, northern Sumeria. He's got the elongated head and a statue, and it's what they call the coffee bean eyes. That's what archaeologists say, that these kind of strange eyes, they call them coffee bean eyes. So these perhaps are, this is in theory depiction of an Anunnaki person, and whether it's an extraterrestrial or not, that's a big question. More pictures of them. These are authentic statues, there's no question about it. This one on the right is a woman, she's got a child. With the Sumerians and stuff, they would depict people on flying discs and things like that, flying around, Vimanas. And so I write about Vimanas quite a bit in my books, and I'll talk more about them tomorrow. See how we're doing here. Yeah, we're doing all right. Okay, so Nikola Tesla. Now let's switch gears a little bit, and we'll start talking about probably the greatest scientist who ever lived and inventor, but he's a suppressed person, really, Nikola Tesla. He was an immigrant from Serbia and went to London first and then to New York City. He worked for Thomas Edison for a while. And then Tesla really is the inventor of AC electricity that's lighting this hotel and the whole world today, alternating current. He and Edison had a battle between DC and AC, but it was Tesla who invented alternating current. And alternating current is rotating magnetic fields. That's what creates alternating current. Here's Mark Twain in Tesla's laboratory, sort of the end of the 1800s. Really, Tesla was at the Chicago World's Fair in 1892 that he demonstrated the current AC system that we're using today. So Chicago, in a sense, was the first city ever really lit by AC power. Later, after the Chicago World's Fair, where Tesla was able to get Westinghouse interested in developing AC power, they then put the first real power plant at Niagara Falls. And so Toronto and New York City and Albany became really the first big cities that were powered by AC. Tesla went on, though. I mean, he was a genius, but he was a man at a time. He was a social misfit. He was a terrible businessman. He had no idea how to run a company or spend money, but he was a tremendous inventor. And what he wanted to do, he would have these fires and stuff like that. He went to Colorado Springs, and he developed he wanted to develop these towers. And what Tesla was going to do was broadcast power to the atmosphere. And by the way, his student, Guglielmo Marconi, who was Italian, British, and then did a lot of his experiments in Canada, he was Tesla's student. Marconi was credited with inventing the radio for a while, but later it was reversed, and Tesla is really the inventor of the radio. Marconi was a genius, too, and I'd like to talk about Marconi. Many Tesla buffs don't like Marconi because they think that he was kind of stealing Tesla's inventions and getting credit, like for the radio and stuff like that. But Marconi was a genius, and unlike Tesla, he was a very good businessman. Marconi knew how to run companies. He became a millionaire, multi-millionaire. He lived on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He supposedly lit lights in Australia from Europe by putting energy through the earth. But what happened to Marconi is very interesting. And there was a book published in Italy and in Mexico in the 50s. And here's what they claimed. Officially, Marconi died in 1936 as a relatively young man. He was a multi-millionaire. And then suddenly he was dead, allegedly. And that's the official story of Marconi. According to these books, Marconi faked his death, took 100 scientists and a lot of money, went to South America, built a secret city somewhere in a crater in Venezuela or in Colombia or Brazil or Ecuador or something, out in the jungle, and built flying saucers. This was all before World War II. So this is an interesting story about Marconi I'd like to talk about. There's very few English books that talk about him. Here's another character, Einstein. And what Einstein also, around this time, he suggested what's called the unified field. So Einstein was saying that gravity and magnetism and electricity were all manifesting from one source, which he called the unified field. So according to Einstein, just like you would have an equation for electromagnetism, we have that equation, Einstein said, yeah, there's going to be an equation for electrogravity and an equation for magnetogravity. So the unified field was essentially the source of anti-gravity equations and things like that. So the unified field. And so when you have anti-gravity and you're creating your own gravity bubble, you can do anything. Your flying saucer takes off vertically, hovers, it's all electric. You stand there. I wanted to show you, this is just from last year in May. This was right over Dayton, Ohio, which is a major military base, by the way. And it was this weird kind of arrow-looking thing just hovering in broad daylight over Dayton, over the military base. Just hovering there, apparently for hours. People took photos of it, and then it finally disappeared. But you know, it wasn't moving across the sky, it wasn't moving up and down, it was just staying exactly in place. So yeah, this is anti-gravity type technology. This is from a book that we publish about with anti-gravity and storage fields that can have to do with mercury, gyroscopes, electricity, and that's part of the thing too. With any kind of UFO and spaceship that Tesla would have been involved in, they're going to be electric. The idea of going to the moon in a rocket or something. I mean, if Tesla died in 1943 during World War II, but yeah, if he had survived to be part of the American space program, we would have a completely different space program than we have today. Tesla would invent death rays and things like that. They involve mercury and shooting like pellets of mercury with his death rays and other stuff. Scalar wave type things where you create an energy bottle and these two different waves of energy converge at one point here. And so if you're over here, the waves are okay. But yeah, if you're right here where these waves are coming together, pow, you know, you're disintegrated. So what Tesla wanted to do was create this worldwide power tower system. And he started to do this in the 1920s. He first started his experiments in Colorado Springs, and then he moved them ultimately to Wardenclyffe in Long Island. And he was going to build, and he began building these towers. What he was going to do was he was going to broadcast electricity like a radio station broadcasts a radio signal or a TV station broadcasts a TV signal. And that what would happen then in his system, and J.P. Morgan began to finance all this, is that you could then put a lamp on a table and you wouldn't have to plug it into the wall, you would just turn it on. And it would be taking power from the atmosphere. And we now have this today with the Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. We're sort of there now. But he was doing this in the 1920s. What happened was with this was that and Tesla had with his towers, we'll see here, this is, in the 1930s, when Tesla was doing all this in the 20s, there were popular magazines, Electrical Experimenter. These were these concepts of Tesla's power system. Here's the power tower. It's putting out the power. Yeah, got these airships. They have no wings. They're anti-gravity airships. They've got these lights and stuff coming down. They're all drawing power from these airships and stuff. What happened then was that J.P. Morgan realized what was going on. This was essentially free energy. You couldn't meter this power. And J.P. Morgan realized, wait a second, you mean when we get this all going, people won't be paying an electrical bill? Because you couldn't do that. And all you could really do was sell them the appliances. You know, the lamps and the toasters or whatever that take the power. And J.P. Morgan, you know, he said, I don't want to be an appliance maker making so he pulled all the funding from this. And ultimately, it all came down that the whole thing failed, and the FBI tore the tower down, the first tower that was built. It doesn't exist today. Now, coming around this same time was a group that started in Chicago and Milwaukee. They were called the Lemurian Fellowship. This is in the late 1930s, during the heyday of Tesla and all of his stuff. And they eventually moved here to Los Angeles and then to the La Jolla, San Diego area in the 40s. They maintained in their interesting literature that in Atlantis, there was a very similar Tesla-type power. And they called it the Max Tower of Atlantis. And they claimed that it was this gigantic crystal tower. And what it did was beam power out into the atmosphere, like Tesla's towers, and that the airships of Atlantis and stuff like that would pick up this power from the max tower. Well, it's pretty interesting, this whole idea of a giant crystal tower. Well, do things like that exist? They do. So an obelisk is that thing. An obelisk is a monolithic crystal tower. And it has to be built out of granite, because granite is infused with small quartz crystals. So you're not going to build your power tower out of sandstone, say. No, it has to be made out of granite. And it has to be one single piece of stone without any imperfections. And it's literally tuned, like with a tuning fork. So you have these obelisks. Obelisks do appear around the world. They're mainly in Egypt. They're in Ethiopia. There's other obelisks we'll talk about. Egyptologists do not have an explanation for obelisks. These obelisks weigh about 500 tons. Today, now some of them are inscribed with Egyptian hieroglyphics and stuff. But why Egyptians would quarry and then erect and move and these giant obelisks, and in some cases, like at Karnak in Luxor in southern Egypt, the entire Karnak temple is built around several obelisks. So the obelisk had to be there first before they could build the temple around it. They cannot figure out how they erected obelisks. There's very few books about it. There's only about 3 books ever written about obelisks, and I wrote one of them. So the whole thing of obelisks is very mysterious. Here's the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, an old photo. According to Egyptologists, in the one book I could buy, and when I was in Cairo one time, here's the unfinished obelisk again. Their explanation of an obelisk was that it represented a ray of the sun. Just, the sunbeam coming down. Yeah, that's what an obelisk was all about. It's just a representation of a ray of the sun. A 500-ton representation, So the whole idea, and they don't know how they can erect them, move them. I mean, it's something else. Here's my friend Christopher Dunn down inside the trenches where they're excavating the obelisk, but then they stopped. He maintains that they had heavy equipment to cutting into the quarry. This is solid granite here that they're cutting through. So the idea then that these obelisks are really these Atlantean power towers. They would have to have a power plant actually attached to them, and then they could put out power. At the very least, obelisks are some kind of giant acupuncture needles for the earth, at the least. Here we go. Here's the Washington Monument being hit by lightning. The Washington Monument is kind of an obelisk too, but it's not a real obelisk. A real obelisk has to be monolithic. One solid piece of stone, which is the thing. Yes, sir.
How come they haven't figured out how to utilize this technology? It's in fact some sort of energy generator.
Well, the obelisk itself isn't necessarily an energy generator. It's an antenna. Yeah, yeah. And so it's either gonna, as an antenna, it's either abstracting power, like an acupuncture needle would be, and putting power into the earth, or it can be projecting power too. But it would have to have a power plant. And so like Tesla's power plants, his towers, there'd have to be a AC power plant there that would, with rotating magnetic fields, which they call a 3-phase motor. So, I'm just fascinated by obelisks. I have a book on this whole subject, by the way, and obelisks are in Ethiopia. And here's some of the obelisks there. In fact, the largest obelisk in the world is in Ethiopia. It's a fallen one. This one here, it came crashing down and broke into all these different pieces. Here's some of the pieces of it. It is the biggest obelisk ever known, and it's not in Egypt. It's in Ethiopia. Many obelisks, Egyptian ones during the 1800s and stuff, were taken to Rome, were taken to Paris, taken to London. There's an Egyptian obelisk in New York City. So and then of course the Washington Monument. I mean, isn't that interesting? I mean, the symbol of the power of Washington D.C. is the Washington Monument. And yeah, when you're watching Wolf Blitzer or somebody, you know, this is the obelisk behind them, the Washington Monument. That's the power. Yes, sir.
What's the estimated size of that one?
Yeah, 520 tons, I think. Estimate. And so, yeah, most obelisks are 400 tons. This is the largest, 520 tons. So other smaller obelisks, maybe only 300 tons. I can tell you, anything that's 50 to 80 to 100 tons is a gigantically huge thing that, you know, people, and look at all the technology we have today and all the buildings we build. We don't build with 100-ton blocks of stone. We build with, you know, cinder blocks and things like that. So that's part of the thing. This obelisk, when it came crashing down, it also hit this other giant structure and broke it. We don't know what it is. And the legend there in Aksum in Ethiopia is that there's this anti-gravity machine underneath there that lifted up all of the obelisks because they can figure out how it was done. That's their legend. So that anti-gravity machine, you know, is down in here somewhere. Aksum was great. I love Ethiopia, and I hope you'll go there. It's a super country. And there are the keystone cuts there, just like we were talking about before. Here, those are keystone cuts. Molten metals are poured into here. Here we go. Here's actual metal clamp. This is unusual to see that. Usually the metal clamps are taken out. This one is there. So yeah, it spans both blocks. And if you're coming to my workshop tomorrow, I go much more into that. Solid doors, cut through a door through a solid rock. They believe in Ethiopia they have the Ark of the Covenant. It's in this building right here. That's what all the Ethiopians believe that. Yes, sir. You don't carbonate. You cannot carbonate stone. No, yeah. Carbonating is only for organic things, pieces of wood and bone and stuff like that. What archaeologists do a lot of times, which is completely, or you know, can give you false readings. You're going to have a, you know, let's go back to this real quick. Let's say, you know, you want to date this thing here. Oh, well, when did they build this? Well, you dig over here, and then suddenly you find a piece of wood underground, or a bone or something, or a turtle shell or something, and you go, oh, well, let's date this, you know, turtle shell, and that gives you a date. But that's not necessarily, you know, when that thing was built. That bone could have come thousands of years later. So that's a big problem in archaeology, and they make that mistake constantly. Anyway, this is where they think the Ark of the Covenant is in this building. I discussed that in my recent book, Ark of God. This is the quarry that's out of Aksum, and I'm always trying to go to the quarries to see, you know, where they're cutting this stone and what's left at the quarries. They're often a lot of interesting stuff. So it's this mountain outside to the west of Aksum. Some of the quarry marks, big saw marks and things like that. These are stones that are left in quarried. Also in Ethiopia are these monolithic churches at a place called Lalibela. It's a different site than where the obelisks are. But here, these things are also monolithic. They're cut out of solid rock like this. And there are also temples like this in India, Ellora and Ajanta. And what they claim here in Ethiopia with all these things is that the workers would work in the day, but during the night, angels would come down and finish all the work for them. So that's their legends, stuff like that. What's that? What? No, yeah, just cutting rock through solid tunnels. You also see this in Peru and stuff like that, different blocks. All right, now let's go to England. You know, there are actually obelisks in England. They're called the Devil's Arrows. And they're in Yorkshire. They're not so famous or visited like Stonehenge or something like that, but they're there, and they're very worn. They're near the highway. There's like 4 of them together, and they're very ancient. They must be thousands of years old. And the local legend is that the devil was throwing these giant rock arrows, these obelisks, and they're sticking there. So those are the obelisks of England. They've got these grooves and stuff in them that people were doing. There's another obelisk called the Rudstone monolith in Rudstone. It's also in eastern Yorkshire. What it would look like. This is it right there. It's obelisk. They put a little tin cover on it to like protect it. So that's obelisk there in Yorkshire. Here we go. All right, now let's come to the United States. We're headed for the moon, you guys, in a few minutes. How am I doing here? Okay, we're doing all right. So, back in the 70s, Charles Berlitz wrote this book, The Bermuda Triangle, which was a huge best-selling book, just sold 20 million copies or something. And that brought on this whole wave of Bermuda Triangle type books. And people also started writing these Great Lakes Triangle books. There were several of those. And, you know, I collect all these old paperbacks and stuff. And this is one of the books. And it's written by a Canadian. His name was Hugh Cochrane. Gateway to Oblivion, the Great Lakes Vortex. Well, one of his chapters in his book is about this place. And it's called Presqu'île Provincial Park. It's right up here. It's on the Canadian side of Lake Ontario. Now, the story he tells in the book is that in 1804, it was well known that there, just in the water, just about 100 yards or 200 yards offshore, was an obelisk sticking up out of the lake, and there was just the tip of the obelisk coming out. And that people would actually, on a nice Sunday or something, they would row their boat out to this obelisk, tie their boat to it, have a picnic. They could look down into the clear water and see the obelisk going down several hundred feet down to the bottom of the lake. And this was a famous thing. But what happened was, in 1804, there was an Indian chief, and he had some argument with them. And he kind of cursed this town or whatnot, and he said, you know, oh, this big storm's going to come. And then what happened was, there was this big storm on the lake, and a ship was coming to the harbor over here. And the storm, and it was at night, and it was a terrible storm. And they went down to the shore, and they lit big bonfires to try to direct the boat to shore and get it there. But the boat came in, and it hit the obelisk, knocked it over, and the boat sunk too, I guess, and you know, people swam to shore. But that was the end of the obelisk at that point. So just a bizarre story of an obelisk in Lake Ontario. By the way, there was supposedly an obelisk at Tiwanaku and in front of Pumapunku too. All right, now let's go to the moon. And in the mid-1960s, there was a British astronomer looking at the moon. This is before the Apollo missions. And he was using Soviet photos and things of the moon, and he found what he claimed was a set of obelisks on the moon. His name was Blair, and so they named these the Blair cuspids. Here's here's the photo over here, and it's from the shadows. Here's a drawing, and now I'll give you okay, so this is what it supposedly looks like. This is what the Blair cuspids are on the moon. They're a series of obelisks. They're casting these shadows on the moon. So now this whole mystery of the obelisks is now on the moon. So what are these obelisks doing on the moon? That's a big question. They're known as the Blair cuspids. There's a lot of weird stuff about the moon. The moon supposedly rings like a bell. Some people claim the moon is hollow. There's a lot of oddball things about the moon. The moon not just only keeps its dark side away from us. We can never see the dark side of the moon as it rotates around us. But the other strange thing about the moon has to do with eclipses. Our moon is in such a position. It was just an eclipse the other day. Our moon is in such a position in the sky that during a lunar eclipse, what happens is you're on Earth, and you have to be at a certain spot on the Earth to see this, right, of course. But then the disk of the moon transits the disk of the sun. And then during a full eclipse, the sun is eclipsed by the moon. But the problem here is that a lunar eclipse like this is a perfect eclipse. When the disk of the moon is there covering the disk of the sun, it perfectly covers it. It doesn't more than cover the sun, and it doesn't less cover the sun. It perfectly covers the sun. So that means, our moon is in such an orbit around our planet, if it was a little closer to the Earth, it would more than eclipse the sun. If it was a little bit farther from the Earth, it would less than eclipse the sun. But our moon is in such an orbit, it perfectly, not more, not less, perfectly eclipses the sun. That a satellite or a moon should just be arbitrarily, coincidentally, in that orbit is a zillion to one. And that would indicate, and no other moon in any other planet does anything like that. This is an indication that our moon is in an artificial orbit around our planet, and it's been specifically placed there, exactly where it is. All right, so let's move on. We know there's also craters on the moon that they don't know, they can't find a bottom to, like this. These are, back in the 70s, they started writing books like this, Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon, stuff like that. All right, this Russian Zond 3 photo, 20-mile high tower on the moon. Okay. So yeah, we're, not only are there obelisks on the moon, but 20-mile high towers. How about that? Russian photos, I mean, that's part of the thing too. A Russian photo of a lunar dome. A lot of the Russian photos are much better of the moon than you get from NASA. NASA apparently airbrushes everything out that they can, that they don't want you to see. The Russians don't really do that. But even on NASA photos, you can find some unusual things. Like this Apollo 11 frame appears to be kind of a ziggurat type structure on the moon. We have here kind of a saucer kind of craft or something in like a hangar. Okay, some also craft, like this on the moon, like sitting there. It's kind of derelict craft. There we go. I mean, I can't vouch for, total reality of that, but there's stuff on the moon. There's just absolutely no question about it. The way that we see obelisks and other towers on the moon is by the shadows that they cast. That's how we have to connect them. This thing, supposedly on the moon, kind of a Tesla type energy thing. We don't know what this is, what that's about. Seems to be some kind of artificial type structure up there. All right, now let's actually go beyond. Let's go to Mars real quick. Mars has two moons, Phobos and Deimos, and they actually rotate in opposite ways around Mars. And it's been suggested a long time ago that the moons of Mars are somehow artificial, and also placed into their oddball orbits. Here's Phobos. It has all these weird striations, little craters and things on it. I mean, they're very, very strange. They're kind of rocks in space. And on Phobos is here. Once again, we're looking at some kind of a tower or something here on Phobos. Yeah, this is some kind of obelisk or tower. I mean, we don't know this, again, but just by the shadow that it's casting, there's something going on there. Here's some looks at it. Some kind of weird kind of thing. We just don't know what's going on there, of course. Now, the Russians also, in March 25th, 1989, this is a Russian cosmonaut, Maria Popovich. She's holding up a photo of the Phobos and this craft. This craft is coming to the moon. What the Russians had launched a couple of years earlier, their Phobos probe. It was a Russian probe going to Mars. Here's the photo. So this Russian probe, as it approached Mars and was turning and looking at Phobos and taking photos as well. Here, we'll look at it this way. And so this craft is suddenly moving into view, there you see on the right, to either, and it's huge, and it's moving there near to Phobos. Then what happened was the Phobos space probe, as it was named, then shifted to take a picture of Mars, and it took this photo of something coming at it, and then the probe went out, and it was like shot out of orbit. and it stopped taking any photos. The Russians lost their probe. That was it. They don't even know what happened to it. But it had sent those 2 photos back to the Space Command in Russia before it was shot out of space. So here's Deimos. This is the other moon of Mars. And it's kind of unusual, too, that the idea that our moon is hollow, and it may be that those moons are hollow, too, and it's almost like they're lit from inside. Some of the things, we just don't know. Some mechanical parts on Mars, just little weird little bits and pieces are on there. There's a pyramid on Mars called the D&M pyramid, as they call it. There's even a supposed Sphinx on Mars that they've taken pictures of with pyramid in the back. Other oddball, what seem to be the remains of structures and things on Mars. And what's interesting, what I'd like to point out as well is our solar system. And in the mid-1800s, there was a German mathematician, and his name was Bode. And he created a thing called Bode's Law. And Bode's Law was a logarithmic progression that went out from the sun. And with Bode's Law, what he basically said was, yeah, as you're coming out from the sun, there's going to be a planet here, and then there'll be another planet here, and there'll be another planet here, and then they get farther out. This was his thing. And Bode's Law largely fit our solar system, except for one thing, and that was the asteroid belt. In Bode's Law, there should be a planet there. It's between Mars and Jupiter. So according to Bode, yeah, it's like, well, there should be a planet here between Mars and Jupiter, but there's not a planet. There's just a bunch of rocks in space. So that whole idea was then that that's the exploded planet, that there had been a planet between Mars and Jupiter. It literally blew up. And some people claim they blew whoever they were, they blew their own planet up. And today it's the asteroid belt. So the asteroid belt, yeah, probably was a planet once. So the largest body in the asteroid belt is Ceres. It's the largest. It's like a mini moon in the asteroid belt. And it's got these little bright lights in this crater. And that baffled NASA too. They couldn't really explain what this was about. And again, it's like there's either just something in that crater, or again, it's being lit from the inside. And that this is too like a hollowed out, artificial kind of satellite. I think NASA's explanation ultimately was that, yeah, there's something just very reflective here, like something like mica and stuff. And so it's just just some mineral ends up there super reflective. That's their explanation. So here we go. Let's also now, we'll go to Saturn and the satellites of Saturn. Saturn has a lot of moons. And we're going to now look at this one here, Eoptitus, as they say. Okay, so the bright side of Eoptimus. Eoptimus has been very interesting. NASA's quite interested in it. It's got these umbilical things. And then what's strange about the moon is this kind of seal around it. It's got this rim. And again, it kind of looks like it's some artificial thing with this rim, that it's been somehow engineered or something, this moon. So here we go, and here's this ridge. It's almost like they put 2 halves of this moon together or something like that. And
That's like several miles high.
yeah, it's right, and it's huge, and no other moon really has this. It's an unusual thing. They're trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Is it one side dark and one side light?
Yeah, right. And here we go. It's a yin-yang kind of thing. So yeah, there's many, many mysteries in the cosmos, and for me, the whole thing of the obelisks on Earth and Tesla, and then going to the moon, and I'm convinced that there's something going on there, and the Tesla technology per se is on other planets. It's on the moon. Was used in Atlantean times. I think of Nikola Tesla as like a reincarnated, Atlantean engineer, something like that, who's bringing all these inventions and things really back, back to us. Tesla, what they did with him, they demonized him at the end of his life, and he died during World War II. He died in 1943, and in fact, right when Tesla died, the FBI and went right to his offices to take all his papers and inventions and take them back. There's stories too now that he was murdered and that the Nazis had sent special agents during the war to murder Tesla and take his plans. But what they also did to Tesla during the war, they wanted to discredit Tesla and many of his ideas. And during World War II, there was a Superman cartoon series, which is public domain today. In fact, we created a movie, but this was the early Superman cartoons. And the very first one of those cartoons, these started coming out in 1942 during the war. The very first of the cartoons was Superman versus the mad scientist. And the mad scientist has this Magneto ray, and and the mad scientist in the cartoon is clearly Tesla. And so at that time, they began turning Tesla from this great inventor to being a mad scientist that Superman had to stop. So that was the whole thing. And that's basically my presentation for today, everybody. Thank you. And yes, sir. Have time for a few questions if you want. Otherwise, yes, ma'am.
I couldn't understand when you're saying they demonized
Tesla.
Now, he was inventing things that would prevent people from becoming multi-billionaires because that would eliminate us paying for energy, etc. I can understand how things like that can happen because I understand, I don't know if it's right, but I understand that's what happened in the automobile industry, that they destroyed all the railroads to be able to sell millions and millions of cars.
Yeah.
So have they ever pinpointed like who these they are?
Bankers and industrialists, just money people who are the investors and stuff like that. The real suppression is from the military and government, stuff like that, ultimately, I would say. And part of it is with the military, and that's why I think the anti-gravity and the flying saucer type technology, the military has all that, in my mind. And so they're ultimately the ones who are suppressing that. Yeah. Yes, sir.